June 6th, 1944, the most important day in modern history. Thousands of young men storming the beaches of Normandy under a sky full of bullets and smoke. The world knows this day. Movies have been made about it. Monuments have been built for it. But there is a part of this story that almost nobody tells. There were roughly 2,000 black soldiers on those beaches that morning. They crossed the same ocean. They faced the same bullets. They bled into the same sand. And when they came home, America treated them like they had never been there at all. To understand the full weight of what these men did, you have to understand what their lives looked like before the war. In 1940s America, black citizens lived under a system called Jim Crow. Separate schools, separate restaurants, separate water fountains. A black man could be arrested, beaten, or killed simply for stepping out of the boundaries that white America had drawn around his life. Lynching was not a distant threat. It was a reality that hung over every black family like a shadow that never moved. This was the America that asked black men to go and fight for freedom. In 1941, a 26-year-old black man from Wichita, Kansas, named James Thompson, wrote 5 words that cut through everything. Should I sacrifice my life to live half American? That question became a rallying cry. The Pittsburgh Courier launched what they called the Double V campaign. Victory over fascism abroad, victory over racism at home. 2 wars, one fought in Europe, one fought right here on American soil. More than 1 million black Americans were drafted into a military that treated them as second-class soldiers from the very first day. When black recruits boarded trains heading to military bases in the South, the train would stop at the Mason-Dixon line. Black soldiers were forced to leave their seats and move to the back. The uniform of the United States Army meant nothing once you crossed that line. At the bases, the segregation continued. Separate barracks, separate dining halls, separate latrines. They even segregated the blood banks. Blood donated by black Americans was kept separate from blood donated by white Americans, as if the color of a man's blood could determine his worth on a battlefield. Black troops were often assigned to support roles, unloading ships, driving trucks, moving supplies. The Army did not want black soldiers in combat. They did not want the world to see black men as warriors and heroes, because if black men came home as heroes, it would be a lot harder to send them to the back of the bus. But without those black soldiers in support roles, the entire Allied campaign in Europe would have collapsed. After D-Day, the Allied forces needed to push deep into France. They needed fuel, ammunition, food, and supplies, moving constantly across hundreds of bombed-out roads. A group of truck drivers was assembled to make it happen. They drove through the night without headlights to avoid German detection, through enemy territory, through exhaustion, through fear, up to 400 miles in a single run. This unit was called the Red Ball Express. 75% of those drivers were black drivers. They are the reason General Patton's army kept moving. They are the reason the war ended when it did. Most Americans have never heard their names. On the morning of June 6th, the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion landed on the beaches of Normandy. Black soldiers landing under direct fire, men dying around them. One member of that battalion, William Dabney from Roanoke, Virginia, said he was picking up dead bodies and watching mines explode around him. He did not know if he would survive the morning. He survived, but he came home to an America that did not want to hear his story. Not a single black soldier received the Medal of Honor during World War II. Not one. Despite fighting in the same battles, despite performing the same acts of extraordinary courage, despite dying on the same soil. It was not until 1997, more than 50 years after the war ended, that President Clinton awarded the Medal of Honor to 7 black soldiers who had earned it decades earlier. Most of them were already dead. Think about that. These men waited their entire lives for a country to acknowledge what they had done. Most of them never saw it happen. And then there was the journey home. Johnny Jones Sr., a warrant officer who had served in Normandy, described boarding a bus after returning to the United States. As the bus crossed the Mason-Dixon line, he was told to move to the back. The same man who had survived the beaches of Normandy. The same man who had served his country with honor and dignity. He said it himself, "I could not sit with the soldiers I had been on the battlefield with. I had to go to the back." Let that land for a moment. These men did not give up. They came home from one war and walked directly into another. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s was not built by people who had been sitting still. It was built by veterans, men who had fought Nazi Germany in the name of freedom and came home determined to claim that freedom for themselves. In England and France, they had experienced something they had never experienced in America. They had been treated like human beings. A Black American soldier wrote that in England he was treated for his personal worth, that he did not know he was colored until he looked in a mirror. He had to come home to remember what America thought of him. These men carried that memory, and they used it as fuel. The story of the black soldiers of D-Day is the story of America's greatest contradiction. A country that asks its most oppressed citizens to die defending the values it refuses to extend to them. A country that puts a rifle in a man's hand and sends him to fight for freedom while making sure he knows his freedom has a limit. They died for a freedom they never had. They bled on beaches that the history books barely mention them on. They came home to a country that looked the other way. And here is the question that should keep you up at night. You went through years of school. You were taught history. You were shown documentaries. You visited museums. Did anyone ever tell you their names? If the answer is no, that is not an accident. That is a choice somebody made, and it is time we unmake it. This has been Unsaid America. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The most important stories are the ones nobody is telling. Subscribe, and we will keep telling them.